Welcome to Daf Yomi Week in Lightning Review, where we hit a few more highlights from the week's dapim, all 7 of them. I'm Rachel Scheinerman. This is My Jewish Learning hosting the event, and we are joined by Rabbi Elliot Goldberg. Let's get to it.
All right. Hi, everybody. Live, and hi to the people watching later on our YouTube channel. Could be good afternoon for them. This week, we shifted a little bit. We were in a chapter of Masechet Gittin that was talking about things the rabbis did, mipnei tikkun olam, which while in our day, tikkun olam has a sense of social justice and the activism and things that we can all do to make the world a better place. For the rabbis, the mipnei tikkun olam was about correcting legislation that they had produced that somehow had to be corrected. It had a unanticipated outcome, or sometimes the people they were trying to help actually weren't helped as well as they might be by the legislation. So the rabbis changed the rules to make the world a better place, right? It's more of a legislative thing than a social action thing. But as we moved into this week, we read a Mishnah that relates, is parallel, but were things that the rabbis did, mipnei darchei shalom, for the sake of peace. And I'm gonna, people are still, we got people all over the North America here with us today. I'm gonna put in the chat a link to the text that we're gonna start today. So you should see it right there. And if more people say hello, I'll put it in again so people can find it. But I want to look at the Mishnah that lists things that the rabbis did mipnei darchei shalom, for the sake of peace, or for the ways of peace. Talk a little bit about what those things are in the Mishnah, and then look at the very first sugya about it in the Gemara, which seems at the beginning to be a normal way to start discussing a Mishnah, but I think the message today is the rabbis are doing something interesting in the Gemara that in some ways doesn't make sense, like even for the Gemara. So that's where we're headed. So here we go. I'm gonna put in that link so it's at the bottom one more time. You can open up or just follow along with me. So the rabbis say, Elu Dvarim, the Mishnah says, Elu Dvarim Amru B'nei Darchei Shalom. These are the things that the rabbis said we should do, that they instituted for the sake of peace. So the first one is about Torah reading, that a Kohen, a priest, reads first, and then a Levite, a Levi second, and an Israelite third. And this talks about the ritual of Torah reading, in synagogue, where the first 3 aliyot, the first one's reserved for, oh, nice. Thanks, Rachel.
I'm trying to put it on my screen in case people want to see it.
Got it.
Sorry, we seem to be loading slowly.
No problem. Okay, awesome. Thank you for the visual help. Appreciate that. The priest reads first, then the Levite, then the Israelite. And that's, in many congregations, we still do that today. The first aliyah to the Torah goes to a Kohen, and then a Levi, and then an Israelite, right? The Mishnah says reads because in their day, in the days of the rabbis of the Mishnah, the person who had the aliyah said the brachot and read from the Torah. And they said they instituted this for the sake of peace. Now, why might this be for the sake of peace? I think as the Kohanim and Leviim had a class status, and there was a certain honor that was due to them, so that there wouldn't be fighting about like how many honors to give to which groups. They standardized the aliyot. So that's number one. The second thing they said was when a courtyard, a number of households in a courtyard are joined together with an eruv. The eruv is placed in the oldest house in the courtyard, or the place where the eruv had placed for a long time, for the sake of peace. If you remember from Masechet Eruvin, one of the things that courtyards did on Shabbat was like people who lived around the same courtyard made the courtyard common space to be able to use it on Shabbat. And they did that by placing food there in the courtyard that was shared food. And for the sake of peace, the Mishnah says, the house it's always been placed in, or the oldest house, or the first one to live in the courtyard, that's who should get the eruv. Why? So there's not fighting between the different people in the courtyard about whose turn it is. The rabbi standardized it. Where it's been for a long time, or the person who lived there first, they get the eruv. Let's not argue about it. Instead, have a good Shabbat. The next item in the Mishnah, just say as I'm going, you might be noticing this Mishnah jumps all over Jewish law, some to places we've covered already, some to places we will cover later. But it shows the breadth of just areas where the rabbis thought they had to intervene for the sake of peace. So the next one is that says the pit that's nearest to the irrigation channel is filled first on account of the ways of peace, right? Mipnei darkei shalom. That means if you have an irrigation channel that brings water to fields and there are pits or wells that are filled up with water, whose pit do we allow to fill up first? The one who's closest, and that's also a thing that we do for the Mipnei Darkei Shalom. Why? So that people don't argue and fight about whose water should be filled up first. Next one says, animals, birds, or fish caught in traps, if someone who didn't own the trap takes them, that's considered robbery. Why? Mipnei Darkei Shalom. So what does that mean? If I set a trap and an animal's caught in the trap, by rabbinic law, as we'll see soon, not too many in the next coming months, I don't actually take possession of the animal that's caught in my trap until I physically take it with my hands. So that means if you would happen by my trap and there was an animal caught in it, you could legally, by biblical law and rabbinic law, take what's there because I haven't acquired what I trapped, even though it's my trap. So, but you could see, understandably, like if I caught animals in my trap and happened by later, and like I see evidence of animals in the trap, but they're gone, I might be upset to find out that you, my neighbor, took those animals. So the Mishnah says, for the sake of peace, we consider you taking animals from my trap, even though they're not yet mine, but because it's my trap, they should be mine. So if you take them, it's like robbery. Although Rabbi Yossi says, no, actually, this isn't something they did mipnei darkei shalom. This is actually robbery. It's not for the sake of peace. Like, even though technically I haven't taken possession of the animals I caught in my traps, they're mine and you shouldn't take them. And it's actual robbery, not for the sake of peace robbery. And that same machloket, that same dispute happens about the next item as well, which is if a deaf, mute, an imbecile, or a minor finds a lost item, and no one claims it, like, they could potentially take possession of it. But since minors, deaf, mutes, and imbeciles don't have full citizenship and can't own property, if they find an item, if you take it from them, it's technically legal. But for the sake of peace, we're going to call you taking a found item that a deaf, mute, or an imbecile or a minor finds to be theirs, and we shouldn't take it because of the ways of peace. Although Rabbi Yossi again says, those who do take it as full-fledged robbery, this is not mipnei darkei shalom. This is actually robbery. Almost done with the list here. It's a good list. It's just a long list. The next thing, I love this one. If a poor person is gleaning olives from the top of a tree, olive trees are pretty short, so maybe they're reaching up for them or they're on a short step stool. They're taking olives from the top. They acquire the ones that they gain possession of that are in their hands, and maybe they put in their basket or their sack, whatever they're collecting them in. But if some fall down under the tree, technically they're not yet the person's because they haven't taken hold of them. And the rabbis say in this Mishnah, if you walk by and take the olives that have fallen while a poor person is collecting them from the top, you're actually stealing from the poor person, mipnei darkei shalom. And again, we hear Rabbi Yossi say, no, this isn't for the sake of peace. That's actually robbery. If someone's gleaning from the tree, especially a poor person, and something falls, leave it for them. It's theirs. Don't take it. Last item, that you don't protest against poor Gentiles who come to take leket shichacha or peah, the gleanings that they're allowed, that we leave for the poor people, right? Things that have dropped in the field, things you forgot in the field, or your unharvested corner of the field. Those are all things that by Jewish law, farmers and those in agriculture have to leave for the poor. It's the way in which there's economic protection for the poor. Certain items in the fields are the property of the poor. And if non-Jews, but the Torah says it's about, right, this food is for the poor among you, for your brothers, for your people, meaning for Israelites, for Jews. But what this Mishnah says, if poor people who aren't Jewish come in with the Jewish poor and take this property, we don't protest, which I guess might mean also we don't send them away. We don't make a stink. We allow everyone who's poor to come take tzedakah in this way from our fields. Mipnei darkei shalom. We don't not just because we want to support. Right, it's not an obligation to support all the poor people, but it is mipnei darkei shalom. For the sake of peace, we allow all the poor in our area to come and take possession of those. So that's a long mission of the Gemara, of course, over the course of this week. Dug into a little bit about what each of these things mean. We heard some interesting stories about some individual items on this list. I love the breadth of this list, all the different areas that the rabbis have pointed out in this Mishnah. It almost feels to me like they're saying, here are all these things on this list, and they're from all over Jewish law and all over, Jewish living. It feels to me like in some ways a challenge for us to think about what other things might be doing. We do mipnei darkei shalom, that maybe this isn't meant to be, only these things. I would think that we today might think about other things in Jewish practice that mipnei darkei shalom we might be flexible about, or extra strict about, or extra generous about for the sake of peace, and that this list might be meant to be an example as opposed to like only these areas. That's my take on that. But so having read this list, I want to go to the first sugya about this Mishnah and just note something interesting that took place in the Gemara this week. So the Gemara starts by asking the question, Mina hani mile. Where do these things come from? That's a standard Talmudic question that opens a discussion of a Mishnah. And it asks an important question for the rabbis, and a pretty straightforward one. From where are these matters derived? Where do we learn, where do we get this from? And when the rabbis ask from where do these matters derive, what they're asking really is, what pasuk in the Torah, what verse in the Torah, right? Where in the Torah that sets out our law do these things come from? So we've seen this, if you've been reading Daf Yomi since the beginning, we've seen the question, Mina hani mili, from where these matters derived, dozens, if not hundreds of times. I didn't count. I guess we could do a search for Mina hani mili to find out how many times it actually appears in the Talmud. But it's pretty common, especially the first conversation about a Mishnah. Where do these halachot come from in the Torah? So, and at the beginning here, the Mishnah, of course, the Gemara, of course, is talking about the first list in the Mishnah, which taught us that when you're reading Torah, the Kohen gets the first aliyah, the Levi gets the second one, and an Israelite gets the third. So they ask, where do we find that in the Torah? And the rabbis of Gemara come up with a few verses to answer this. So Rab Matna teaches, there's a verse in Deuteronomy 31:9. Moses wrote this Torah and delivered it to the priests, the sons of Levi. And the Gemara says, wait, we know that the priests are the Kohanim are the sons of Levi. They come from that tribe. So this must be telling us something different. And what does that mean? It's telling us that when you're reading Torah, the Kohen goes first, the Levi goes second. I have to note about this. Some of you may have been with us yesterday as we talked about the end of the siyum for the book of Dvarim, of Bamidbar, the end of the book of Bamidbar, where my colleague, Dr. Schwartz, said this reading of Deuteronomy that separates out here priests and Levites into two different groups is not what the Deuteronomy intended. The new learning I had yesterday. So the rabbis here have a midrash that says, this first says the priests and then the sons of Levi. It means priests go first, sons of Levi go second. But he actually taught me that Deuteronomy, when it uses this phrase, means priests are the sons of Levi, and actually Deuteronomy thinks all Levites are Kohanim, and they're not two different groups, as opposed to what won out over time in the rabbinic tradition, that the priests are the sons of Aaron and the Levites are everybody else in the tribe. So this midrash here is, well, it's the midrash halacha we see here. It's not what the biblical scholars say the Bible's saying. Sorry for that tangent, but I had to throw that in because I just learned it yesterday. It was fun for me. So anyways, that's the answer here. We get a second answer. A second answer from Yitzchak Napacha that says, a similar verse, and the priests, the sons of Levi, shall come near. And they ask the same question. Don't we know that the priests are the son of Levi? So this must be teaching us that who comes near first? A priest, a Kohen, and then a Levite, a Levi, and then an Israelite. So this is the verse that teaches us about the order of the Torah reading. Then we have a few more very similar ones. So I'm going to skip over the next two paragraphs because they don't say something so different. And then, perfect. Thank you, Rachel. Oh, go back one. Oh, no, sorry, you're in the right place. My bad. Here's the kicker, I think, from this. Abai says to Rav Yosef, and you might have this question too. He says, wait a minute. The Mishnah says these are the things that the rabbis did on account of the ways of peace, meaning everything in the Mishnah, according to the Mishnah, is a rabbinic enactment. And if it's a rabbinic enactment for the sake of peace, the question, the question, where do we find it in the Torah, doesn't make any sense, because we said in the Mishnah, these are things the rabbis did, changes the rabbis made on top of the laws we already have to keep peace between neighbors, to keep peace between one person and another. And now you're looking for verses in the Torah as if it's biblical law, not rabbinic action. Rav Yosef answers to Abaye, but indeed, these are biblical laws, or at least this one in particular. But the reason that the Bible rules this way is account of the Mipnei Dakei Shalom. And I think this is a fascinating thing here in this part of the way in which, because of this conversation, in some ways, this conversation, the original conversation and Abaye's question to Rav Yosef, it presents a brand new reading of the Mishnah and changes perhaps how we look at all of it. Because the Mishnah, I think, in itself is saying, these are things we did. We're proud of these things. Mipnei Dakei Shalom. We updated our laws. We made things work so that there could be peace between neighbors. The Gemara comes without even thinking about it, and said, maybe without even thinking about it, says, Minani Mile. Where is this from in the Torah? You know, I would think maybe Abaye's objection should have been before all the answers, to say, what do you mean? Where's this in the Torah? This was a rabbinic action. People did this, not the Torah. But no one asked that before, and they look in the Torah. Let's find sources that say Kohanim can have the first aliyah, and Leviim could have the second aliyah, and Israelites have the third aliyah. They found a bunch, and Abaye says, yeah, but still, Abaye brings the question, and Rav Yosef says, actually, this is what the Torah intended, but the Torah had the same intention, that Mipnei Dakei Shalom. So, given the nature of the Midrash Halacha, given the nature of the explanations, right? None of the verses that the rabbis brought actually say the Kohanim should have the first aliyah when reading Torah. They just talked about Kohanim and then Leviim in that order. You could read that first sugya saying, not looking for the origins of these laws, but looking for biblical evidence that supports them. Sometimes the rabbis bring a verse, they call it an asmachta, which is a support for something they did, but not the origins of something that they did. That might be the way to read it. Rav Yosef says, actually, this one rule comes from the Torah. Now, it's possible that some of this conversation is about the rabbis weren't, later rabbis or the Amorim, or at least Rav Yosef wasn't comfortable with the innovativeness of this Mishnah, saying, the Mishnah can't just make things up. The rabbis of the Mishnah can't just add new things. We got to find it in the Torah. That is often the motivation for Minahane Mile, because the Mishnah, of course, does not, 95% of the time reveal the biblical sources of what it lists. So when the Gemara asks the question, where do we find this in the Torah? It's a good question to connect back the laws of the Mishnah to the Torah, where in theory they all originated from. In this case, I think anyways, these are not things that came from the Torah, right? And if we see in the rest of the chapter, and if you read it already, in the rest of the chapter, you'll see this question doesn't carry through. There's actually an acknowledgement that the rabbis stepped up and stepped in and made changes, mipnei darchei shalom. And I'm much happier with like that original read of the Mishnah that says sometimes you have to step in and make adjustments mipnei darchei shalom, as opposed to what happened here later, where this sugya tries to connect back the actions that the Mishnah reports to biblical sources, at least for the first thing. So a couple, I guess, questions to leave for you to answer in the chat before we open things up a little bit. Although I don't know how many, Rachel, because you shared your screen, my clock went away. So give me oh, there we go. We got 7 minutes left. Thank you. I lost track of the time there, but we got time. So I'd love to hear from people, questions you have about this, and or comments about what your favorite item from the Mishnah is that we do mipnei shalom, or maybe even some area of Jewish life today that we do mipnei shalom. Some potential things to think, maybe to put in the chat or respond to. But of course, any question that you have, we're happy to deal with in the last 7 minutes.
I would love to hear what people think we do mipnei darchei shalom for the sake of peace. We've got a meta question in the chat from Alan, which is, why is Gittin even involved in this in-depth discussion about it? That one's for you, Rabbi Goldberg. And then also a slightly, perhaps, if I may say, more cynical question: is this the rabbis just trying to justify certain things and then sort of post facto saying, well, this is mipnei darchei shalom, this is for the sake of peace, but maybe there's another motivation behind some of them?
Oh, all right. Those are two good questions. So the first one, why is this in Gittin? So we are more, it hasn't been straight through because there were other things that came in between, but pages ago, it's at least a couple weeks, it could be a month, I don't remember how far back, and I'd have to flip through the pages, but there was a piece about that said, witnesses sign a get, mipnei tikkun olam. Right, I think that was the first one. So we started with something about the writing of the get, like witnesses have to put their name on the get and sign it. And why? Mipnei tikkun olam. Because without their name on the get, we didn't have as much evidence about if a woman was divorced or not. And we couldn't find it. We couldn't find anyone to substantiate. If we needed to substantiate that the get was real, we couldn't find who the witnesses are if they weren't listed and signing the get. So you might recall that Mishnah. That started a whole conversation of everything else that was done mipnei tikkun olam, and then that led to this discussion of mipnei darchei shalom, because it's similar, even though it's not the same, to mipnei tikkun olam. So we're on an extended tangent, even though there have been tangents to the tangents, but this all landed in Gittin because sometimes the Mishnah and the Gemara, like once a particular phrase come up or a particular topic comes up in context of the topic of the Masechet, that could, sometimes everything else that follows that same pattern is listed. So we went from pages and pages about Mipnei Tikkun Olam to now pages and pages about Mipnei Darkei Shalom. But the first one linked to Gittin. That's how we got. So that's number one. So that second question about are these things that became things that we were doing that the rabbis wanted to codify or justify later? It's hard to know historically the order of this. We don't have our best evidence about some of these things in the life in the first and second centuries in Palestine is in the land of Israel is about what the Mishnah said, right? We have more evidence from the text we're studying than outside. It might be that there was already a custom that the person who's lived in the courtyard the longest or the oldest house gets to have the Eruv in it. And the rabbis wanted to make sure to keep it that way. So they put it into the Mishnah. Or it might be that they were seeing lots of cases and lots of fighting in court, in the courts to say, I want the Eruv. No, I want the Eruv. And they were like, all right, we're just settling this. So it's hard to know if these practices happened first and the rabbis wanted to cement them by putting them in the Mishnah, or that these were things that were for which we had strife. And then the rabbis were more, put it in the Mishnah to end the conflicts between neighbors. I see some pieces. I saw some questions about the Kohen Levi Israel thing too, came up in the chat about how do we know who's a Kohen and a Levi today, right? Some families have a tradition that they're Kohanim and Leviim. We have no way to trace back ancestry that, to the biblical era. There have been some studies that show people who have a tradition of being Kohanim. I think the studies I've read are mostly in the Ashkenazic, like Ashkenazim who have a tradition of being a Kohen have similar genetic markers, which from a science perspective might say they're all related, but doesn't necessarily mean they're all Kohanim or Leviim. They might have all, we can't trace back farther than that, but it does suggest they might be from the same families. So we don't know for sure, but we honor people who have that tradition today. Some synagogues continue to call up Kohen Levi Israel. In egalitarian synagogues, sometimes where men and women have equal access to participating in tefillot, some egalitarian synagogues are also egalitarian about the priesthood, so that there is no Kohen Levi Israel in calling up people to the Torah, but they do just congregants get to go where the same way those synagogues have gender equality, they also don't want to have a class system, which isn't functioning today. It happened. I married into a family of Kohanim, so I know some Kohanim who feel, very strongly about the Kohen identity and protective of that first Aliyah. But I also married into a family that has strong egalitarian values, and so they feel the conflict between the two. Anyways, that's sort of an aside.
Some people are pointing out that assigning the first Aliyah always to a Kohen and the second to a Levite could also create resentment. And I think one thing that's kind of interesting to think about in the background of this particular sugya is that the rabbis were not always very favorably disposed toward the Kohanim and the Levites, right? There was some resentment on the part of the rabbis and some power struggle between them and the Kohanim for who was really in charge here of the Jewish people. So
Right.
so they may very well have seen ceding this honor as really a give. And actually, I think later in this sugya, if I'm not mistaken, they take it back a little and say, well, sometimes you have a very esteemed rabbi and they can get the first instead. Right.
Sometimes an esteemed guest can take that place. I do wonder, I know where it happens. The daily minyan where my father-in-law goes, he's the only Kohen. So it's not like there's a group to choose from. So like on a weekday when there are 3 aliyot, he always gets one of them. It's a nice thing. But if there are 20 regulars, then 33% of the aliyot go to one person. I could see how they're being resentment on the other side. In a town with lots of kohanim, it might not be the same thing. And you could say mipnei darkei shalom. We do away with this practice so that everyone feels like they could have the first aliyah. I wonder about that. Think about that today. Like in my synagogue where I'm at now, maybe at yours too, on Yom Kippur at Kol Nidre, when all the Torahs are taken out of the ark, former presidents of the board get to hold them. And that's an honor for people who have served the congregations, and given, blood, sweat, and tears, and, lots of late night meetings to keeping the institution going forward. But it also means like not just anybody can, hold the Torah. And the question is like, are we honoring somebody because of their status? Or do we want this to be something that everyone can do? And which is mipnei darkei shalom, might be community specific and not something we could standardize across the way. But I think about these issues, especially this first one about giving honor. The question is like, how do we as a community, in the ways we give honor, also maintain the peace? And that's an important thing for us to do.
We're almost at time, and I apologize.
Yeah.
There have been a lot of public and private messages coming at me. I apologize if I missed yours. I have one that came through privately to me. I wanted to pose to you, Rabbi Goldberg, because I'm actually sure I have a good answer to this one. A week or two back, we were seeing all these rulings, mipnei tikkun olam, for the sake of repair of the world, and now we're seeing mipnei darkei shalom for the sake of creating ways of peace. Is there a substantive difference, or are those terms interchangeable?
I think there's a substantive difference because the first set, mipnei tikkun olam, takes an existing rule and changes it. So often there we set the rules for writing a get were you needed witnesses, and the change was witnesses have to sign. Why? Because by not signing the get, something, we couldn't prove that it was a legitimate get. So there was already a rule. The mipnei darkei shalom, well, now that I think about it, it's not as strict about this. It's different. Sometimes I'm just thinking about the trapping one, right? If I catch an animal in the trap, it's not mine till I pick it up. The reason why they didn't change, they changed it to say, if you take it, it's theft, is not there because the original law did was some sort of disservice, but probably because it wasn't the law that was the problem. It was like the people fighting over the implementation of the law. I think of the mipnei darkei shalom, what's similar about that category is the interpersonal conflict that arose from that's my deer. No, it's my deer. No, it's my trap. So it's my deer, but you weren't here. I got it first. And to keep that argument from happening. And I think the mipnei tikkun olam things, for the most part, wouldn't lead to that, interpersonal conflict. And that's, I guess, a broad, 30,000 feet sort of piece. I guess everyone on this call, as readers of the Gemara and Daf Yomi, know we could probably sit down and create our own sugya about, well, no, this one that's mipnei tikkun olam is actually could be mipnei darkei shalom and back and forth. So I don't think it's a strict rule, but if you look at the list, that's generally, one is about fixing legislation that wasn't doing its purpose, and one was about keeping the peace between a person and their neighbors. And sometimes there's overlap between those two, of course.
Thank you. We got an answer from Rob Plass, very similar in the chat as well. But there does seem to be an underlying motivation of making things work the way they should.
Yeah. And an acknowledgement that they don't always, and sometimes we need to intervene to make that happen.
Yeah, but that was a good question. All right, we are a little past time. I don't want to hold everybody, but thank you, Rabbi Goldberg, for bringing us back to this sugya and for the interesting discussion about how it's working in the text and how it might work in our lives today. Thank you to all of you, as always, for active participation, for your private feedback and questions as well. I welcome those as well. Always a pleasure to learn with all of you, and we will see you in your inbox tomorrow morning and in this space in 1 week's time. Have a good week, everyone.
Everybody, and Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.